Hi, my name is Sean Del Beccaro, and I, like Andrew and Sam said, had the privilege of knowing Scott. And when I was trying to think about what I should say today, so many different thoughts ran through my head. I thought of the countless stories I could tell, the many road trips Scott and I went on, the summer we spent pranking people, a lot of people in this room actually. The time that Scott got thrown out of our first baseball game in 5th grade, arguing at the ump. The 3 cruises that we went on in high school with Dr. and Mrs. G and Uncle Jim too. And just so many of the stories that we had doing Sun Servants together. But as I was thinking about these great experiences that I had with Scott, I didn't like these stories because of the crazy and often stupid stuff that we did. I like these stories because I got to experience them with Scott. And I look back on these stories with fondness because of that. And we are all here today because we had the pleasure and the joy of experiencing life with Scott. I mean, look around, like they talked about, this place is overflowing with people that have come from near in this community, but have also come from Tennessee, from Texas, from Florida, from everywhere. And that's because Scott just had a special ability to make you feel special. Scott loved so well, and that was whether you were best friends with him or whether he had just met you. Since Scott had an amazing sense of hospitality that came from his parents. One minute you had just met Scott, and then all of a sudden you were swimming in his pool. And no one knows how it happened so quickly, but you were. Scott could make the quickest jump from stranger to best friend faster than any person I've ever met. And as we go to the reception later, I want to challenge you guys to talk to each other to see how that happened. Because so many of us met Scott, and then an instant later, we were best friends with him. We were at his house. We were hanging out with him. We were doing so many things with him. And as we're here today, we can remember that. We can remember how well Scott did that. And he did that because his most defining characteristic was that he loved well. He loved so well that he was able to make you feel immediately special because he knew that he was special in the eyes of Jesus. Scott lived by the Spirit and walked in step with the Spirit. He was so acutely aware of the great love that the Father had lavished on him, he counted it a blessing to be called the child of God. And Scott took the knowledge of this blessing and shared it with everyone that he met. Sure, Scott may have not said it in as many words, but the way that Scott lived his life, through the trials, through the good times, and through the bad times, was an even greater testament to his intimate relationship with Christ. I mean, if there was anyone who had a right to doubt, to be angry, or to be in a bad mood, it was Scott. I mean, looking back, I remember being so bummed and so angry the first time Scott was diagnosed with cancer, and every time after that. But Scott would have no such thing. Sure, Scott wasn't happy to have cancer and wasn't thrilled to go through all the pain that he went through. But instead, Scott would just go into his treatment the way he looked at everything else in life, with unwavering optimism and hope. Scott was always the eternal optimist, and that wasn't just when the White Sox were down 10 runs in the bottom of the 9th. Scott was able to see the bright side of things because he kept his eyes upon the bright light of Jesus. Scott knew that he could cast his anxieties on Jesus because he cared for him. Scott could take a hospital room and make it into a party room. Scott could take making chemo in his basement into a Taylor Swift dance party. And this optimism that Scott maintained was rooted in his faith in God. Scott's faith was so strong that it could move mountains. It moved the mountains that covered my high school self and anxiety. It moved the mountains of doubt and so many close friends. And Scott's faith moved the mountains that shielded so many people's hearts, and he replaced it with love. And as we're gathered here today, Scott would want us to focus on the good and to find a silver or an orange lining. Scott would never want to see people just depressed or distraught or down or upset. Instead, Scott would want you to be filled with the hope and the joy that consumed his life and infected everyone around him. For I've had numerous conversations with Scott about the effect his life has had on other people and in the way in which he changed lives. And as only Scott could say, I would go through it again and again, and I wouldn't change anything knowing that it has allowed people to know Jesus better and to feel loved. So let's take this day to celebrate who Scott is. A silly guy with a serious heart, a man of God who is a child of God, the Woody to my Buzz, and someone who always said, you've got a friend in me, and someone who went the distance, someone who lived for the glory of God, and someone who lived well, and someone who loved extremely well.
Whoa, I didn't look back till now. Those of you who know me know that in the course of my career I do a lot of public speaking and I never read, but in order to get through this today I'm going to have to. I want to thank first Scott's band, because sitting there with the Packers and the Tennessee jersey and the White Sox jersey and the Blackhawks jersey, those are all his passions, and thank you for honoring Scott today. Lori, Chris, Jeff, our families, and I would like to thank all of you for coming today. We also would like to thank all of you who visited with Scott and us over the last weekend. Your presence and support has been a source of great comfort for us. We want to thank all of you who brought food, supplies, and sent so many messages of support and sympathy. We offer you our heartfelt thanks. Today should be a day of celebration. We should put aside our sorrow and be joyous as we celebrate Scott's life. Although his life was short, it was rich with love and faith. The strength and age of a tree is not measured by the number of leaves it has, but by the size of its trunk. Although Scott did not have many pages to the calendar of his life, the strength of his faith and the number of strong and loving relationships he forged made that foundation as broad as if he had 100 years. Scott was an incredible young man. Even as a child, he was inclusive of all, making friends with many. Our house, our basement, our barn, our pool were always filled with his friends, and their laughter and spirit filled our home with joy. He was the most faithful and loving person I have ever known. He was kind, he was caring, he was selfless. As he lay in his hospital bed in terrible pain, he wrote on his blog, "I feel like I've been hogging all the prayers. What can I pray for you today?" Through this 5-year ordeal, through 4 major surgeries, 5 full courses of chemotherapy, 4 courses of radiation, he never lost his faith. He never once asked, "Why me?" He never complained, and he never was down or depressed. Last year, when he was told he had months to live, I asked him to talk about his feelings. And with a broad smile, I remember this day, he said, "Dad, don't worry about me. I've put it all in God's hands. If his will that I die now, I accept that without question." I'm not sure I could have that courage and such faith. When the tumor eroded into his spinal cord, rendering him paralyzed from the waist down, I asked if he wanted to talk about it. And he said if that was God's will to be confined to a wheelchair for the rest of his life, he would accept it. And he then proceeded in typical Scott fashion to set daily goals for how fast he could get around the 6th floor in the hospital in his wheelchair. And each day he had a slower time, knocking over nurses and orderlies on the way around. As Scott's father, I taught him many things: how to hit a curveball, how to throw a football, how to skate, play hockey, how to drive a car, the intricacies of quadratic equations and cell biology. I edited his themes and papers. But he taught me something much more valuable: how to live life with faith and how to face death with faith, courage, and grace. Now, although loving and kind, he was not perfect. He had very little tolerance for any athletic teams from the University of Florida, or as he liked to call them, Kensucky and LS Pooh. He also had little tolerance for the Chicago Cubs or their fans. Gee, I wonder where he got that from. Several years ago, we attended a White Sox-Cubs game at Wrigley Field. I got the tickets from a Cubs season ticket holder, so poor Scott and I were an island of silver and black in a sea of Cubby blue. The Sox weren't playing very well that day, and we incurred a lot of razzing. Down by 2 runs with 2 outs in the top of the 9th, it did not look good. But Scott, the ever-optimist, would not give up hope. And sure enough, Ross Glode somehow managed with 2 strikes, a seeing-eye infield single. Jermaine Dye walked, and A.J. Przinsky then hit a dramatic 3-run homer to put the Sox ahead. Bobby Jenks retired the Cubs in order in the bottom of the 9th for a White Sox victory. As we were walking out, a small boy, no more than 6 or 7, dressed in a Cubs jersey, hat pulled down over his eyes, big tears streaming down his face, was being consoled by his parents. Now, I was very touched by this scene and said to Scott, "Don't you feel sorry for this young man?" And he said matter-of-factly, no, that's what he gets for being a Cubs fan. All of us have prayed hard for Scott to be healed and thought our prayers were not answered. But I know now that they were. God healed Scott in every way you could be healed. Not physically, but emotionally and spiritually. His heart was always at peace. No matter how hard the cancer tried, it could never break his spirit or lessen his faith. In the days prior to his death, I prayed daily for strength. When I was almost incapacitated by worry and fear, I prayed for God to take away that fear. And almost immediately, a veil of peace came over me. Fear and anxiety were gone, and to this day, they still are. Scott taught me that God always answered prayers. We just needed to listen to his answer, and it would be given. God blessed us all with this incredible young man. His love, kindness, and selflessness touched us all. Scott loved Jesus and his faith, and he wanted nothing more than to share God's love with all who would listen. He lived his faith daily. He not only talked the talk, he walked the walk. He worked in his summers in the Sun Servants, building houses in Mexico, Jamaica, New Orleans, and Appalachia for the poor. He prayed for and with people from all over the world. And the sheer number who have come today to honor his life is a testament to just how wonderful he was. Lori and I were blessed by God to have been his parents. We will always be thankful for having been given that blessing. Although the leaves of his life on the calendar pages were very few, the foundation of his faith was broad, and he lived a full and rich life. We love you and will miss you always, Scott, and look forward to the day we meet again in heaven. Now, many of you know Scott hated dressing up, and in fact, he would be abhorred if he knew I was standing here this morning in a suit and tie. And so, Scott, this is for you.